Okay, welcome back to part two. So spoke through there some of the key things you might want us to have included in question two about hybridization, perhaps a more conventional format of the Guardian, which is more in keeping with the conventions of websites, perhaps than the Telegraph is with broadsheet newspaper. So again, there's a copy of the mark scheme there in your PowerPoint. But what you can do now is have a little think about how you now might want to improve. So what are the targets? What do you need to do next time to approach question two? Is it the structure of your answer, like we talked about there? Did you clearly identify convention? Then look at where we see examples of that. You know, these are all things that if you go back to your notes, go back on your blog, we did walkthroughs of how to answer question two, how to structure it. That should all be there. So think about what you didn't do in this answer. You know, is it knowledge-based stuff you need to brush up on? Is it answer structure? Were you successfully concluding? Did you consider whether or not this was these pieces were conventional, and if so, why? These are all things you might need to think about. Setting yourselves a target, so give yourself a nice clear target based on what we've talked about there. Pause the video, do that, and then when you're ready, come back and we'll have a quick look at question three. Okay, so question three, maybe the most complex in a sense of what you need to discuss, but actually also probably one of the easiest to prepare for. And again, if the marks that you have got were low for this, I can only point you in the direction of revision. You know, you were told question three and question four are about your case studies. The number of you that didn't seem to know anything really about your case studies was fairly high, which to me indicates that we're not maybe brushing up quite enough as what we need to do. So the Guardian and the Daily Mail are the case studies we've been looking at the entire time of the course. You must know, and if you don't, you need to go and brush up again on these things, that the Guardian is a left-wing newspaper, the Daily Mail, a left-wing broadsheet or quality tabloid. The Daily Mail is a right-wing mid-market tabloid. There are certain facts and things that you should know about their distribution. These are all things that we've done in lesson, all things that you've got on your notes on your blog. So that there's a fundamental understanding of what these newspapers are about, who owns them, and their ownership models. They're the absolute basics you need in order to be able to answer this question. So in this one, it says, explain how political context influenced the producers of the newspaper industry. Refer to the Guardian and the Daily Mail. Now, again, as we talked about with context, they're all pretty much interlinked. It could have said, explain how economic context affects it. Could have said about how ownership or regulation, but they're all actually intertwined. And we'll talk about why in a moment. So, first thing to do is to read your answer and have a look for question number one. It says, did you outline the press as the fourth estate and their purpose in holding the politicians to account or not being government controlled? So one of the key things you'd have to talk about here in terms of this being about political context influencing our news industry is the society in which we live. You know, we don't live in a dictatorship. We live in a free society. And the purpose of the press is supposed to be that guardian of truth, holding our politicians and our government to account. Okay, so that's a key thing you would needed to have outlined quite early on in your answer. That's kind of the purpose of the press within the political free capitalist society that we live. Okay, so just have a check, have a look whether you actually mentioned that. Did you get that in? So it's a key idea for this. Pause and come back. Okay. You may or may not have done, but the second thing to consider then is, did you actually outline then, and we're talking about political context, this balance between the press having to hold people to account, but at the same time, them not having a regulator. Because if the press become regulated by government, that also offers these difficult conundrums, doesn't it? That they're being regulated by the people that they're supposed to be keeping tabs on to an extent. So that's where you might have talked about Leveson Impress, and Ipso, for example. This is all within the political context and the way in which newspapers are produced. So just have a look. Did you talk about Leveson? Did you talk about Ipso and Impress and the way that they're regulated in our political context? Have a look, highlight if you did, come back to it. Okay. Number 3, the first thing, again, I said about ownership, it was really key that you actually highlighted or picked up on the fact that the Guardian are governed in a different way. That they're governed by the Scott Trust. So therefore they self-regulate. They're not part of Ipso or Impress or any of the others. And what they do is they self-regulate supposedly for high quality bias-free content. They are not there to chase sales like the Daily Mail are. So this is where you're talking about the political context in which we live. The Guardian see themselves exactly as the Guardian, as the fourth estate, the ones holding the powerful to account. Now, you need to check whether you did that, but also, did you specifically give an example from your case study? So this is where I've been saying all year that you should be buying the newspapers reasonably frequently. You should be reading their news online, finding examples, screenshotting anything interesting, adding it to your blog, this kind of thing. Now, in almost every case, not all of you, but in almost every case, you either didn't give any case study examples, or the case study examples you gave were maybe something that I might have mentioned in the lesson. Now, this is not really enough. And bizarrely, I'm not quite sure how this came about, but I think 3 or 4 of you referenced Tony Blair, Labour, and the election campaign that the Sun changed to Labour and they won the election. I mean, that's from 1997. It's not recent enough. You need to be giving examples of recent times that you have found in your case studies. So if you didn't have any examples to draw upon, you need, and this is something else you can think about in your targets, you need to be reading The Guardian, the Daily Mail a lot more frequently and actually recording and saving examples that you think will be useful to use in your answers. Okay, so have a look. Did you mention that about The Guardian, and did you give specific examples of how we see that they are focused on high quality bias-free content? So have a look at that, pause, come back. Okay, number 4, did you outline that the Daily Mail are owned by Count Rothmere? And obviously what this does in this kind of free capitalist world that we live, it's a profitable organisation, it is a big business. Therefore, what that does, that creates a need for them to create more dramatised, gossipy, mainstream kind of news. Because they're trying to sell papers. Their whole purpose is not necessarily about high quality bias-free content. It is about selling and making money and bringing in readers to their online pages, but getting people to buy their copies of the newspaper. And again, did you then provide examples from your case studies? Did you say something about the Daily Mail and how they create the news, how they are influenced in the way they produce news? You must back it up with examples from your case studies. So again, you then needed some references to perhaps some more trashy stories or specific things that highlight that point. Okay, so again, pause, have a look through yours, highlight where you've done that, and then come back when you're ready. Okay, and lastly, again, if we're talking about political context, you should have commented on the different political leanings of the 2 papers. The Guardian, of course, being very left-wing and liberal, and again, some of you got that wrong, and as soon as you make that mistake, it's very difficult to kind of come back from in terms of your essay, so you have to have this information. And the Daily Mail being very right-wing, very pro-conservative, and again, examples from your case studies to support that idea. So maybe the same story reported on differently by the Guardian as opposed to the Daily Mail to back up what you claim. Okay, and that's you showing that you understand then how politics is overall influencing the way that news is produced by these 2. So again, pause, have a look, come back when you're ready. Okay, so again, things you're going to talk about, the political nature, fourth estate, that they're there to hold politicians to account and reference Ipso, so on. Awareness of the tension between having to hold them to account but also not having a central regulator. The need for the Guardian to maintain high quality content, and then an example, The Daily Mail, for example, though, are in a free market and they need to sell as much as possible, which leads to more salacious or gossipy type journalism, and give a case study, show awareness of their political leanings, both for the Guardian and the Daily Mail. So maybe things like Brexit and whatever you could have mentioned. Okay, right. Again, there's a mark scheme in your PowerPoint. You can have a look, see where you fit on that. And lastly, based on everything we've said, I want you to give yourself a target. So how will you approach question 3 next time? What things do you need to do to make sure the next question 3 that comes up, you're able to answer it? Okay. Right. Question 4. Again, this was a theory question. You were given a choice of 2. You were even specifically told in advance that Bandura would be on there. Again, quite a lot of you left this either blank or seemed unaware of what the actual theorists were. I can only put this down to revision and something that you need to address. Okay. In terms of the structure of the answers, again, just like in question 1, have a look. Pause if you need to. Go and highlight. Did you outline the summary of the theory at the start of your essay? So a quick overview of either Hall or Bandura of what the theory actually means. That was the first thing. Have a look at that. Okay. If you're back with us, the second thing, did you give an example of where you have seen this theory in practice in the news? Have you connected it in some way to the news? It's asked about how is it effective in understanding the news. So you needed to try and tie that in. So here is one example of how we see it in practice. Then, thirdly, again, have a look at your work. Did you outline the limitations? Did you counter that and say, however, it doesn't always work when we're considering the news because? So ultimately, all this essay you do is you outline what the theory is, you talk about how it does apply to the news, and you can agree with it, and then you challenge it and say maybe it isn't the best for news because of this. And that's all you need to do for that question. So it's all about knowing your theorists. So for example, if you did Hall, we could talk about how the audiences decode the message dependent on their cultural historical backgrounds, how we receive it. The dominant meaning, for example, of negotiated reading. So for example, you could have talked about Brexit, and how you read Brexit might be dependent on your age, your socio-demographic status or ethnicity, for example. If you then to that further, you could argue then that the dominant messages are becoming maybe more binary due to the oligopolistic nature of the news market. So that means that because we have this kind of stranglehold of the press by small numbers of people, we've got very little choices in terms of how we receive news. So the space for negotiation is becoming smaller due to the lack of diversities. For example, as you see, 3 papers running 80% of all news brands. A limitation you could apply is that this is the theory of representation, but it's nothing specific to news. I'm going to let you click through that. I'm running out of time for my recording here. You can click through this on your PowerPoint yourself and have a quick read. But finally, give yourself a target about how you might want to apply question 4. Okay, and then I need you to put all of this down or take photographs of your notes if you've done it on paper. It needs to be uploaded to your blog alongside a picture of your answers and specific clear targets on how you want to improve it next time. Okay, I hope that's made sense. If there is anything that you're not sure about, please do get in touch, but hopefully revisiting your notes, looking back on your blog at how to approach the questions, listening to what we talked about here, looking at your targets, and we can make big improvements next time. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye.